Welcome to this new Pixelfudger video. Today we're going to do a photorealistic depth of field effect. This is part 2 of our series comparing ZDefocus and Bokeh. Alright, let's jump back into Nuke. So here I have a full CG shot that has been rendered with a depth channel. The depth channel is encoded in meters, so we know how far away each pixel is from the camera. You don't need to use meters, it could be inches or feet, but we need to know exactly how far away each pixel is from the camera. You can't use a random fog pass or a random mist pass. All right, let's go back to RGBA and we'll set up ZDefocus and Bokeh side by side. So ZDefocus needs to connect its image input and our Bokeh node needs the input. So here in the pipe, I have both the RGBA image and the depth channel. The ZDefocus, we are going to tell it to defocus only RGBA. This is already by default in Bokeh node. The depth channel is set to depth.z. This is where my depth pass is stored. This is true for both sides. On ZDefocus, we need to tell it that our depth pass is actual true depth. So we're going to change the math here to depth. We don't need to do anything here on the Bokeh side. Next, we're going to adjust the size to see what we're doing. So I'm going to increase the size to 20 pixels and make our maximum to 100. And on the Bokeh side, we're going to adjust the multiplier to 20 pixels. So we have something that's a little bit similar. Next, we need to tell both nodes which area should be in focus. On the ZDefocus side, we have the focal point knob here. We can move and pick which area should be in focus. For example, the back of the car here. So that's very convenient. We can pick whichever area we want to focus on. This is great. On the Bokeh side, we do not have such a knob. We have to do it manually. So we have to switch our output type to focal distance visualization. And then we have to enter values for the focal plane here. So I know the car is about, let's say, 2 meters away in front of the camera. The red line is the area that is in focus, and then I can roll that back to the area I want to focus on, let's say the back of the car. And now I'm back to the focused image. So I need to toggle back and forth between the two views constantly. This is very annoying. So right off the bat, I'd say this is a plus for the ZDefocus node. We have a focus picker that is way more convenient than entering the values manually. Next, we can see what happens if we focus at different distances. So to link both of them together, I'm going to do an expression link between our focus plane and the focal plane of the Bokeh node, so I don't have to do it manually all the time. So I'm going to control drag the value here from focus plane to focal plane on the Bokeh side. So let's compare the results. If I focus on the building in the background, we see we have a vastly different result. This is because neither of them right now is using lens simulation, and this is quite important. Right now, I wouldn't use either one of them for actual photographic depth of field. The ZDefocus side is working in the sense that if we have a focal point set somewhere in the scene, the ratio of focus between the background and the midground and the foreground, all of that is plausible. However, as we move our focal point away from the camera, we would need to adjust the size, because the size here represents the amount of defocus at infinity. So if the focus is close to camera, then objects that are really far away could easily be 20 pixels out of focus. That's totally plausible. But if we focus on the building that is very far away, then objects at infinity, not that much farther behind the building, should have a defocus of half a pixel or 1 pixel. So we would need to manually adjust the size every time we move the focal point. So if we focus close or far from the camera, we would need to every time adjust the size here manually, which is very tedious and hard to do because I'm not sure what's the exact number I need to enter here. So this is a big omission in the ZDefocus node. we do not have anywhere to put lens information. We cannot feed the ZDefocus node an f-stop or an aperture or a focal length or stuff like that. So this is a big omission I think Foundry did on the ZDefocus node. On the bokeh side, notice that our defocus here is not photoreal at all. So if we look at the building in the background, you can see that our building here is completely in focus, and the building right next to it, which is just, you know, a few centimeters behind, is completely out of focus. And it doesn't matter if you change the fall off control here, it changes it a little bit, but it's still completely bogus. So this is not photoreal defocus at all, and I would never use this out of the box like that to attempt to do real depth of field. However, the bokeh node does have a great feature called lens simulation. So if we enable lens simulation, we can enter the attributes of the lens we use to render the scene. So this was a 24mm lens. We can pick an aperture, let's say f1.4, tell that our depth pass is encoded in meters, and adjust the size of our sensor. So this particular sensor was a 36 by 20mm sensor. And now we have a photoreal depth of field, and we can do a rack focus. And if we focus on the back of the car, it looks plausible. If we focus on the building, it looks plausible. So we don't have to fight the size control as we focus near and far. So this is a huge advantage of the bokeh node. So if we compare both, the fact that we have lens simulation here on the bokeh side is a huge advantage. And this is a big omission, I think, in the ZDefocus node. So this is a bit unfortunate because I want to compare the speed and the quality of both and see how both react, and it's kind of hard to match them. Fortunately, we do have another option. There is the PXF-Z defocus node that is essentially a wrapper on the ZDefocus node, and that's going to give us the math automatically to calculate the size according to our focal length and our f-stop and everything. So let's switch out the ZDefocus node for a PXF-Z defocus node. Alright, so now I have my PXF-Z defocus here. So I'm going to set up the lens simulation to be the same on both sides. So if I go in ZDefocus, I have a tab here called lens simulation. Here in bokeh, it's called lens. I'm going to enable the lens simulation, set my world scale to meters, my focal length to 24 mils, our f-stop to f1.4, and the size of our sensor is 36 mils. And I've already linked the focal plane on both. So if I focus on the back of the car, now we have a pretty identical result in terms of the amount of defocus. And if I focus on the building, now notice that the car doesn't become completely out of focus the way ZDefocus did. Now we have a very realistic fall off. So now I can do a rack focus and the size will be computed automatically according to my lens information here. So this is great. I really want to compare the edge artifacts on both. So this is too small a defocus to really show the difference. So I'm going to cheat here. I'm going to go back to lens simulation and switch my world from meters to feet. So that's going to make the defocus much bigger. It's going to simulate as if we're filming a miniature car that's only, 2 feet long, or instead of 2 meters long. That way we can compare what's happening on the edge. So both sides aren't amazing. This is a big challenge. So whenever your background is in focus and your foreground becomes out of focus, the foreground becomes transparent. So as the car becomes transparent, we should be seeing new bits of the building, which we don't have, which is a huge issue. This is a big challenge no matter which tool you use to defocus. So here the ZDefocus node is trying to reinvent whatever is on the background by doing a sort of inpainting. The bokeh node makes no attempt whatsoever to recreate what's on the background. We still have a bit of a nasty edge here. That's because my depth pass has some filtering on it. So to cheat that, what we could do is create a dilate node, which is called erode fast if you call it from the tab menu, and we can dilate our depth by -1. And if we put that on our image here, you can see my depth is going to expand outwards by a pixel, and that's going to help our edges quite a bit. So that's one pro tip here. You can use a dilate node on your depth pass if you need to clean up your edges. Just do a single pixel, don't go overboard, but you can see the difference here between before and after. So now that we have a proper depth pass, we can really compare the Inpainting feature. So if you compare both sides, you can see that the ZDefocus is trying to inpaint the background, trying to recreate the color of the background, whereas the bokeh side doesn't do anything like that. Obviously, with a gigantic defocus like this, both are not that successful, but if you have a more reasonable defocus, if we switch our scene back to meters, we can see the difference here is pretty obvious. So if you look here, since it only needs to rebuild a few pixels, it's actually pretty successful on the ZDefocus side and not at all on the bokeh side. So I think this is a big difference between both bokeh and ZDefocus. Is ZDefocus has a fill foreground effect, an inpainting effect that bokeh does not have. We want to have both lens simulation and the fill foreground feature, and this is the main reason why ZDefocus exists. All right, so now let's try to do a rack focus, animate our focus between the foreground and the background. So I'm going to keyframe my focal plane. I'm going to go to the first frame, focus on the back of the car, set a keyframe on my focus plane, go to the last frame, focus on the building, and I'm going to adjust my curve a little bit. And now we're going to render this. So ZDefocus should be fairly quick because it has GPU acceleration, but the main reason it goes pretty quick is because we only have 50 layers by default. So the layers are the depth bands that are stacked together to create our variable defocus effect. We don't have that control on the bokeh side, for better or worse. So the advantage of not having the control is you don't have to worry about it, and it usually looks pretty nice out of the box. But the problem is you can't tweak it to increase performance. So if your amount of bands here is overkill, you have to pay for them all the time. On the ZDefocus side, you can adjust the number of bands manually. So let's see how that looks in real life. If we look here, you can see that our defocus is steppy towards the end. You have multiple frames where the value is the same. So see, it stays stuck for a few frames, whereas the bokeh side is a more gradual transition. So this means I'm running out of bands here. I don't have enough depth layers. So we can adjust that here by switching our automatic layer spacing off and increasing our depth layers to the maximum of 256 layers. So that way we know we won't run out. And to compare apples to apples, let's switch our filter shape to a circle. So we both have the same shape on both sides. All right, let's render that again. So now the ZDefocus side is much slower because we have 256 bands of defocus to render. So now the speed difference between both sides isn't as dramatic as you'd think it would be. So in terms of speed, I think we're pretty much at a tie, at least on my machine. I don't think there's such a difference between them when you crank up the depth layers. Now remember, you can adjust this. So if you need speed, you can make this much lower. The quality will suffer, but it's going to make your life much easier to set up your shot, and then you can crank that back up when you're ready to render. On the bokeh side, you don't have that adjustment. So if it's slow and you can't adjust it. All right, so now we have a new render with 256 layers, and we can see that our bokeh shapes aren't getting stuck anymore. It's not steppy anymore. It changes at every frame the way it should. And now our result is pretty much the same on both sides. The main difference being the fill foreground feature. So if we look at it in motion, you can see that this side is much cleaner. Here's another pro tip. If you still feel like you have edge artifacts on areas where you have a big jump in depth between the foreground and the background, there's always the option of doing an edge detect on your depth pass, and that would look something like this. So you have an edge detector that's giving you the big jumps in depth, and then use that to, you can clamp it and blur it a little bit so it's a bit softer, and you can use that to blur the edge after your defocus. So you could use a blur node and mask it with your edge detector and increase the amount of blur here. So now wherever there's a big jump in depth, you're going to have a little bit of blur to at least try to hide the mess that you have here. And you could do that on both sides. Both could benefit a little bit probably from something like this. So now we have a little bit of edge camouflage going on, but this is of course a big hack. Obviously the proper way to deal with this would be to render the car and the background separately and defocus them separately, or create a deep render. But before we get into that, let's just do a recap here on the features. So in terms of RGBAZ defocus, we have 3 options: ZDefocus, Bokeh, and PXF ZDefocus. PXF ZDefocus is a wrapper around ZDefocus, and we have the best of both worlds here. So we do have lens simulation, we also have fill foreground, and we can adjust the number of bands manually for performance or quality, whereas Bokeh doesn't give us the option. So for RGBAZ, or RGBA with a depth channel, I would pick PXF ZDefocus for the best of both worlds. However, both nodes will struggle on a shot like that if your intent is to focus on the building. If you're focusing on the car, then it will look pretty nice. If you're focusing on the background, then you're going to have edge issues. So let's see how we can fix that issue by creating a poor man's deep image so that we can use the deep defocus features of the Bokeh node and PXF deep defocus. Alright, so let's try to find a solution to our edge problems between the car and the building. So no matter which way you want to try to solve this, at some point we're going to need to have access to the stuff that's behind the car. As the car becomes transparent, we need to reveal the building that's behind it. So one solution would be to render both items separately. So here I have a split render. They both have a depth channel. So if I go to the depth, I can see my depth channel for the car, and I also have a depth channel for the building. So I want to convert both of these images, these non-deep images, into a deep image and combine those two deep images together to create one single complete deep image that I can defocus. So let's go back to RGBA here. So here I have the car. It's got an alpha channel, a depth channel. I want to unpremult all the channels, so I have an unpremult node here set to all, so I'm dividing both RGBA and the depth channel. Then I need to convert the depth channel into units that can be understood by the deep from image node. So the depth channel coming from my 3D software is encoded as real units, but deep from image is expecting the inverted values, so it's expecting 1 divided by the distance. So we need to do some math on our pixels here to convert them in the right units. We can do that with the expression node, and the expression here is on our depth channel, so we need to specify depth and the Z channel here, and the formula is 1 divided by the value from depth.z. Z is the channel, depth is the layer. The easiest way to know if your values are straight or inverted is you can see that when they're straight, the values go up as they move away in the distance, and when they're the other way around, they go down. So this is the format that deep from image is expecting. If your values are not in the right format or in the wrong channel, deep from image will not work. All right, let's go back to RGBA. And then here we have our deep from image. These are default values. I didn't change anything. And we have the exact same branch on both sides. So we have an unpremult on all channels. We have our expression with our format conversion, and then another deep from image. All right, so now we have both deep images created from our original RGBAZ images, and we can combine them with a deep merge. And we can have a look at our deep image, of course, by putting our viewer on it, but that won't tell us much. It looks like a regular over. If we want to inspect our deep buffer, we can use the deep to points node to inspect my deep image, and now I can see my deep buffer in 3D as a point cloud. We have the car in the foreground and the building in the background. Pay attention and make sure you do have all the stuff that you need in the background, especially if the deep image came straight from the 3D software. It might happen that you don't have the stuff that you need. If your render looks like this, for example, from the point of view of the camera, you might have everything, but you don't have the stuff that's hidden behind the car, for example, and then the whole maneuver is pointless, because obviously the whole point of doing deep is to have access to the stuff that's hidden behind the car. If you don't have any values there, then it's pointless. You're not gaining anything by doing deep. So make sure your deep buffer is complete. Ours is, obviously, because we have the whole building in one of the two images. Now let's try to apply a defocus on it. So to defocus a deep image, we can use, of course, the bokeh node. Bokeh has a deep input, but we cannot use ZDefocus or PXF ZDefocus. So we're going to use PXF deep defocus instead and compare it to the bokeh node. So on the bokeh side, we're going to create a bokeh node. We need to connect the deep input to our deep image, but even if you have your deep input connected, you still don't see anything. That's because it requires a non-deep image still on the input. So we're going to do a deep to image to convert our deep image to non-deep and connect that to the input. And on the other side, we're going to do a PXF deep defocus and connect the deep input to our deep image. And we need to do a little bit of setup. So on both sides, we're going to set up our lens. We're going to enable lens simulation. And our scene is built in meters, of course, but to make the defocus extra obvious for this demo, I'm going to cheat and pretend our scene is built in feet. So I'm going to switch the units to feet, so it's going to look more out of focus to really see the difference. As before, the bokeh node still doesn't have a depth picker, so we're going to use the depth picker from the deep defocus. I'm going to change the bokeh filter on the deep side to be defocus, and I'm going to focus somewhere between the building and the car. And now we can see a big difference between the two out of the box. So if we pay attention to that problem edge we've been having all along, we still have a problem here on the bokeh side. So if we look on the deep defocus side, PXF deep defocus, it's behaving as expected. As the car becomes out of focus, we can see extra bits of the building getting revealed, and this is great. This is something we couldn't do before with the non-deep image. This is awesome. Notice that we don't have that here on the bokeh side because we need to enable integrate deep front and back separately. If this switch is not turned on, this is just a glorified ZDefocus. There are no benefits to the deep image except that it's much slower to render. So let's turn on that magic switch here, and now you can see the difference. You can see extra bits of the building that weren't visible before are now visible. So finally we have a clean edge on the car, but we're not quite at the end of our troubles just yet. So on the deep defocus side, we have something that's fairly clean. On the bokeh side, we have a clean edge on the car, but we do have an artifact here. Look, notice that we have a line in the middle of the ground plane here. So this is not supposed to be there. This seems to be an artifact in the bokeh formula. So this is our first problem. Another issue we're going to have is that if we move our focus point somewhere else, for example, if we focus on the background building, now we're going to have a problem on both sides. Notice that bokeh now is extremely slow. When you're using deep mode, it's much slower. So this is a huge difference now between both sides. So notice that our problem came back here on the edge of the car. We still have a crappy edge. We also have a crappy edge here on the deep defocus side. that looks similar to what we had without deep. So it's doing interpolation, and the bokeh side isn't. So why is it not working? Right now we have two defocuses. We can see that with deep slices. If we change our view to deep slices, we can see that we have one slice, the blue slice, that is in the background, and one other slice, the red slice, that is from the camera all the way to the building. So if we focus on the ground, then we have a good cropping situation. Everything from the ground to the camera is on one layer, and everything from the ground to infinity is on a separate layer, which means that the car and the building are treated as two separate images, and that's the same on both sides here. So that's why we have a clean edge. If we move our focus to the back of the building here, then we can see that the car and the building are on the same layer. So they're treated as one image, and we're back to square one. We have our same problem. And this is true both for deep defocus and bokeh. Bokeh doesn't give us a visualization like that, but we can look at both layers. So if we look only at the front layer, we can see that the car and the building are together. And if we look at the back layer, we can see that only a tiny bit of the building is on the separate layer. So what's the solution? The solution is to change where that cut point is between the foreground and the background. Unfortunately, bokeh doesn't allow us to adjust the number of deep slices or where that cut point is. The cut point will always be where the focus is, even if it's not practical, even if it doesn't give us a good result. So this is as good as you're gonna get. If your intent is to focus on the building, you won't be able to get a cleaner edge using the bokeh node, which is outrageous. One of the main selling points for the bokeh node is to be able to do deep defocus, and we're back to the same crappy edge we used to have with non-deep images. Fortunately, PXF deep defocus allows us to manually take control of the slicing, so we can turn off automatic deep slices. For this, we just need 2 slices, and we can adjust our far point to, let's say, 23 meters or 22. And now we have an even split. So from 0 to 11 meters is all one layer, and from 11 to infinity, it's all the second layer. And we can choose to have more layers if we have a more complex scene. So now I have 5 layers if I have lots of stuff that I need to deal with. This is a very simple scene, so 2 slices is enough. If you need more detail about how to operate all these settings, you can go to the video tutorial that's on the PXF YouTube channel. All right, so now we have deep defocus split properly. So even though our focus is on the building, our cut point is not. It's somewhere in between the car and the building. And if we go back to our result, now we can see that we have a clean edge here. We don't have any artifacts, and the focus is where we want it to be. On the bokeh side, we're stuck. We cannot control where our cut point is between the 2 slices, and we're only limited to 2 slices, period. There's no way to do 4 or 5 or 10 slices. So this is our best result here with the bokeh node, which is pretty bad. And this is our best result here with the PXF deep defocus. And the speed is insanely different in this scenario. Look at how slow bokeh is moving. And I have a pretty beefy CPU on this computer, and it's taking forever to render the whole frame. So this is terrible. We've got the horrible combination of really bad performance and really bad results, whereas PXF deep defocus will give us decent results and reasonable performance. All right, so let's recap here. So for deep images, we can't use ZDefocus or PXF ZDefocus. We have to use either bokeh or deep defocus. Both accept deep. You cannot adjust your slicing, your deep slicing with the bokeh node, which is a huge issue. We can with the deep defocus. We are stuck with 2 slices with the bokeh node, and we can choose as many as we want with deep defocus, of course, within reason. of your hardware limits, but you can adjust the slicing manually here on Deep Defocus. So there you have it. Now you have all the information. You can choose your own tool, whichever is best for the job, right? So I think I'm going to stick with PXF Deep Defocus and PXF ZDefocus, but if you must, now you know the limitations of the bokeh node. All right, so that's it for today. I hope you've learned some stuff and you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.